Okay, so as we said, that's Kerry, I'm Glenn. We like to say we create Zoom Masters. Are you ready to be one? Because that's what we're here to help you do today. Kerry is going to be looking over your images today. She is an expert on shot setup and logistics and video use strategy, as she just mentioned. And for me, I'm here to help you with your message development and your personal branding so that what you are thinking about yourself is what is really getting projected out there on camera. And we are crystal clear on how you want us to interact with you or how we can refer business to you. So thanks for joining us. We're going to do a little judging here in a little bit. So we're going to ask for typically 3 brave volunteers, but we only have 3 or 4 people here on the call. We might be able to get to everybody. But if you'd like to have us help you and you'd like to do your elevator pitch for us, and then we can give you some tips on how you can improve it both from a message standpoint as well as an on-camera presence, that's really what we're here to do and show you how just in 1 hour we can really help you turn things around, make you a Zoom master. Go ahead and put your name in the chat if you're interested in that challenge. We'll take a look at the chats and where we have opportunities during our presentation. We will answer questions either during the presentation or at the end, and Kerry and I are available after the presentation as long as anybody needs us within reason. So the first part of our presentation has to do with being on point. What is your message? And in order for us to really get into what that message is, we need to think about things like your audience. Why does your product or service matter to that audience? What do they get from you specifically versus your competition? And you need to be looking at your competition. And we'll start with message development. Who is your audience? Have you taken the time to think about what is special about, and I'm talking now about you or your company or your product or your service. What age bracket are you searching for out there? What gender? What income level? What education level? These things will all help you really focus on exactly what you need to get to so that you're speaking specifically to the customer you need to. In this particular slide, this is all about the generational gaps that we have and the population between the Generation Z, the Boomers, Millennial, Generation X. We like to say if your product or service is for everybody, then very often it's not for anybody because you're not speaking empathetically enough to a specific audience so they feel like you're speaking to them. So in terms of message development, your audience is number 1. Number 2, in terms of message development, why does your product or service matter to the people who you're trying to sell to? If you can't come up with a great point of difference about what you're doing and make that crystal clear by using features and benefits of the product or service you have, how are you going to stand out? Some of the features that you might want to think about would be, is your product newer? So it's the latest technology. Do you do things faster for people? Your product will be in place or their product will be in place sooner. Is it all about the quality? Your product lasts longer and that's a reason that we would want it. Is it more efficient? Is it less expensive? These are just a few of the features and the benefits that come with them, but we need to know what's special about your product or service because the last part of message development right now is to think about when is the last time you took a serious look at your competition in the marketplace. Have you looked at their websites? Have you had a chance to take a look at their literature? What are the things that they're focusing on? What are the things that they do that you can do better or differently? Because if we're already using them and you come along and you offer the same exact thing as your competitors, we really don't have a reason to go to you. And after all, you realize that we are all fighting for the same customers. Now, there's a lot of them out there, but depending on what your reach is, if you're in a local market, for instance, you want to make sure that you're doing something different than your competitors so that when people are evaluating what you do versus someone who's doing it for them already, they have a reason to think about going to you. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later in terms of how you differentiate what you do so that you can stand out. Those are some of the key things that you need to think about when you're thinking about developing your message. And that's before you ever take the opportunity to go on to a Zoom call, to go to a face-to-face meeting, to think about putting your product or service out there. If you haven't thought about those three things, then it's time to really step back, sit down at your desk, and really think about things like your message development, who your competitors are, and what market you're really going after. Now, I like to use this as a key example. This is the shampoo aisle at your typical mass market store. And you'll notice that the shampoo section here is completely filled in. And I will say that you can see I'm probably not a customer anytime recently, but I used to be. And one of the things that I found is that when people come to me with a product development idea, and I'll say, what is it? They'll say it's a shampoo. And I'll say, great, where is it going to go? And they'll say, well, it's going to go on the store in all these mass marketplaces like CVS and Walgreens and Walmart. And I'll say, great, why don't we take a trip to the store and you show me where your product or service is going to go on that particular shelf. Because the one thing you'll notice about this shelf, it is completely full. And the symbolism here is that our lives are completely full of all the people that supply us with the things we want now. So let me take this out and throw in what I'm going to call your business services store shelf. Now, you didn't know this before today, but we all have one of these. It's up here stored in our brains. And I'll give you an example. Accounting. Everybody's taxes are due right about now. April 15th is coming up. So you either have an accountant, or you've got software that you use to do your own accounting, or you've got QuickBooks or a bookkeeper, but somebody does your accounting work. So now if an accountant comes along and wants to replace the person you're doing that with now, don't they need to come up with something better, something different, something that's going to make them stand out beside who you're using right now? Because if they can't, you would politely say, you know what? I've already got an accountant. You haven't really given me a good reason to think about using you instead of the person that does this work for me now. And as I go down the line and fill in all the different categories here on this shelf, I think you'll agree with me that you've already got an insurance person. You've got your car insurance, whether it's Geico or Allstate or whoever. So if I want to be your insurance agent, what can I do for you that your current insurance agent isn't doing? Because I'm going to come along now with my product or service. I'm going to scream. I'm going to jump up and down. I'm going to email you. But if I don't give you a good reason why you need me, instead of the person that you have doing this service for you now, you're basically going to say, sorry, I don't need you. And the business card or the contact or the email just gets put in the trash. We don't need it. With that, I'm going to throw it over to Kerry and I'm going to stop sharing. And Kerry's going to give you some of her pointers on how to start getting yourself ready for on air.
Very good. Thank you. I tend not to use a lot of slides because I can demonstrate what I'm talking about a little more easily when I'm showing you what bad shots look like and how to mitigate those issues. So we all know that there's a lot of noise out there, right? The digital landscape, if you will, is very crowded. And whether you are going into a networking space or you are looking for a new job or you're considering a transition, there's a whole bunch of people out there whom you are competing with. What makes it especially difficult is that we no longer have the opportunity, or at least we don't right now, to really meet in person. And there are some efficiencies that we've discovered over the past 12 months that will likely mean we incorporate a lot of this virtual type of introduction and meetings beyond, the confines of the pandemic. And so how do you really make yourself stand out when the person to whom you're speaking may be having 5 other of these types of calls that day and 5 more the next day, because we're really filling our schedules with one-to-ones and networking events and all that other kind of good stuff. Where you can stand out in an incredibly easy way is to make sure that your shot looks professional, right? 95% of the people out there have a shot that A, either doesn't look professional, or B, they don't even bother showing you the shot because they have their camera turned off, which is generally speaking sort of a no-no. We're not really having a networking event right now, so I'm not going to come down hard on anybody who has their camera shut off at this precise moment, although we are here to learn a little bit about that. So we'll talk about that at a later date or a later time. But how do you make sure that where you are and what you look like and all that other good stuff is optimized so that you have authority and credibility and you convey confidence simply by the logistics of your shot setup? The first thing I'd like to talk about, and I apologize if you hear my kids screaming in the background, my husband is supposed to be watching them. The camera is supposed to be either at eye level or just very slightly above. And the reason for that is twofold. Number one, it is a more flattering shot, number one. And while we think of a lot of this stuff as simply aesthetics, it is aesthetics with a purpose. And the purpose is to make sure that your message is received in the way it was intended and that people remember who you are and you have created a presentation or a delivery or whatever it is that is inextricably linked with your personal and professional brand. So at or slightly above eye level. The other thing that your camera angle does when it's positioned that way is it makes it a little bit easier for you to look directly into the camera. So often we see people on networking calls or on video calls who are not looking at the camera, obviously looking at some sort of monitor or something over on the side or above or wherever it may be. But the thing about that is that we'd never have a conversation with somebody like this in person. You would never stand here and I would speak over here. I would always directly look at you. And I hope you would do the same. So when your camera is right at eye level, it makes it a lot easier for you to not only find it, but remember to focus there as well. The other thing I'd like to talk about, right? We don't want to see your ceiling and we don't want to see up your nose, and please don't be peeking out of the bottom of your monitor like this and all that other good stuff, right? Directly into the lens. The other thing is framing, and framing means really just where you sort of sit in this little video box. And generally speaking, it's the rule of thirds, right? You split your screen up into 3 equal segments. You generally are sitting smack dab in the middle. Where that changes is if there's a potted plant or there's a lamp or something that would appear to be growing out of your head. If you sat smack dab in the middle, in which case you want to move slightly screen right or slightly screen left. I apologize. At this time of the day, I have light that streams in from a window and there's nothing I can do to cover it. So please ignore this big giant halo effect on my huge forehead right now. The other thing when it comes to conveying authority and confidence and credibility is to make sure that you are present. So what do I mean by present? I mean, you want as little dead space around you as possible. And dead space is the space that is filled with something other than you. And we're all going to have some of that. But when you frame yourself and you sit there, I always advise people to use a lot of news analogies because that's my background. I advise people to think of their favorite news anchor, whether you're a Lester Holt guy or a Rachel Maddow gal or a Sean Hannity. However they're framed or whoever they are, they're framed in a way that's fairly tight. Sorry, I keep hitting my microphone. And what I mean by that is they're usually framed similarly to the way Glenn and I are framed. They're framed from generally mid-chest up. That's not accidental. It's incredibly deliberate. And the reason they're framed that way is because having a shot that's tight, meaning close to the camera, allows your audience to look into your eyes, which is hands down, outside of a smile, the best way to connect and build a rapport with whomever is on the other side of that lens. If you are, far away from the camera and people can't really see your eyes, and I apologize, you probably had trouble hearing me there as well. But if you're far away from the camera and people can't see your eyes, Even though they might not consciously recognize what's going on, there's a part of them that's understanding in here somewhere that they can't really see your eyes. And that damages your credibility with them. And it inhibits your rapport building and your trustworthiness, right? And all of that is sort of going on under the surface. They may not even be able to pinpoint exactly what it is that's putting them on edge, but it's the fact that they can't get a good look at you. And so you want to sit front and center. And by doing so, you confer authority, you convey credibility and confidence. And that's just how you're positioned in front of the camera. It has nothing to do with your delivery or your messaging. It's simple logistics, which is why I say it is the easiest place to start when you're having trouble. You don't have to know anything. You don't have to practice anything. You just have to do it. The other thing that I like to talk about is what's going on behind you. So I realize that we are all in an environment where we are tested, right? Many of us have work from home spaces that were not set up for all of these, video calls, and some of us have had to set up a makeshift office in a closet somewhere, and our lighting is, inhibitive of making sure people get a good look at our face and our eyes. Couple of things that go along with that. Number one, my motto here is if it distracts, it detracts, meaning if there's anything going on in your background or with your lighting that people are going to focus on rather than look at you, it needs to go. So take a screenshot of your work from home situation and run it by a couple of people who aren't as familiar with your background as you are. There may be things there that you don't even notice. It's sort of like white noise. Run it through some eyes who are looking at it freshly, and let them tell you what's going on in your background that's distracting. I like a neutral background. I like to wear a color that pops off the screen because especially when you're in a large group, it's, the eye is drawn to color. The eye is drawn to what's different. And so if you can create a way for people to be drawn to you and what you're saying through something that's not obnoxious, it's just simply the use of color, by all means, you should do it. Black and white, two colors to avoid. They'll make a bad lighting situation worse. Black is slimming in person, on camera, not so much. White will blow you out. And by that, I mean, it just becomes a big giant ball of light in many cases, unless you are very savvy with the sort of lighting you have and how it changes throughout the day, etc. A brand color, blue, universally flattering, that is probably the way to go. The other thing that I want to talk about is lighting. And I'll make this very quick before I hand it over to Glenn. People generally like the idea of being sort of in a shaded situation, right? Many of us hop on these Zoom calls and we want nothing more than to put a paper bag over our heads or turn our camera off and just listen. You're really damaging your ability to connect with people when you do that, though. And there's a couple of reasons for it. Number one, right? They can't see in your eyes. Number two, there's a lot of context that's lost on a video call, whether you're delivering an elevator pitch or whether you are talking in a networking group. You want to try and mitigate those challenges. And if you are being present on a video call in a way that inhibits people from seeing your facial expressions even more than a video call does, you're making it worse, not better. I see a lot of times people sitting with the brightest light source in the room behind them, which has the effect of pretty much putting them one digitized voice away from the witness protection program, right? We used to have a thing that we did in the news industry. And if we wanted to shoot an interview with somebody who wanted to conceal their identity, that's exactly what we did. We put a bright light behind them and we shot them from this side and you can't see their face. The reason that is not a good idea, aside from the fact that it's just distracting, is exactly what I mentioned before. The context is lost. People are already distracted. If you make it even harder for them to see your nonverbals and your facial expressions, you are almost guaranteeing that your message will either A, not be received, or not be received the way in which it was intended. So brightest light source in the room in front of you. I realize right now it's coming to the side of me, but there's nothing I can do about that at this early morning hour. I have a wall of windows in front of me. It's floor to ceiling, wall to wall. I still have 3 additional lights around me. And I realize that makes me sound like a bit of a lunatic, but I have a huge softbox light in front of me. And then I have ring lights on the sides. And the reason is that it allows you to look into my eyes, make sure that you can see my facial expressions, and I'm not hiding in the shadows. It builds credibility and it builds rapport. So you want to think about your background, you want to think about where your camera is, and you want to think about lighting. 3 things that you can do to make sure that your authority, credibility, and confidence come through the screen without having to worry anything about delivery. Glenn?
Yeah, great. And I'm sure you'll notice when you look at Kerry, I mean, she is looking straight into that camera and you can see her big blue eyes. She is looking and talking right to you. And that is really, really, really important. Without even saying a word, you at least are showing up and you're present. And that non-verbal message is really, really important so that people feel that you're there. And go ahead.
If I can piggyback on that, Glenn is making a really good point. People feel very awkward about looking into the camera because they want to look down at the screen in front of them or over to the side, as I mentioned, so they can see your face. What you're missing there, though, is the opportunity to connect with someone eye to eye. And as I said a few minutes ago, that is hands down, outside of a smile, the best way to establish credibility and rapport. So when you are talking, you should be looking into that camera and delivering, because the person on the other side, they don't see any of that. Oh my gosh, I feel weird. I should be looking at their face and I'm not, and I'm missing all these nonverbals. And I feel weird talking into a black hole. That person doesn't feel any of that. All they see is you looking them in the eye and having a conversation. And that is of primary importance. Having your receiver, if you will, get that message in the way it was intended is much more important than your feelings of awkwardness or I don't like doing this.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So let me I'll start up my my share again. And here we go. And back on there, we see that blue screen again.
Yep.
Okay. So Kerry and I are planning some full-length workshops where we can really work with you in a 2-on-1 setting, where we can really take the time to help you write the message, create the image, put it all together, film it multiple times so that by the time the seminar is over, you've got yourself a filmed commercial of yourself doing exactly what you need to do, which you'll be able to use for, your website and for postings, and will also give you that great experience of having done this and graduated from an on-point, on-air seminar. So if that's something that you might be interested in, you could certainly let us know again in the chat box, or you can get in touch with Kerry or myself afterward. Let's talk a little bit about personal branding and how you start doing that. What are you telling us without saying a word? Now, Kerry just spoke a lot about what you need to look like when you're on air. So when you get on air, have you decided already that you're going to be real casual working from home? You're literally, again, not me, letting your hair down, but letting your hair down. What are you telling us about yourself from the standpoint of who you are? I like to challenge people on that personal brand by saying, here I say 3, but 3 to 5 words, adjectives that describe what your personal brand is. What is your attitude? What is your posture? How serious are you about this? I think a lot of us have gotten so comfortable working from home on these Zoom calls that we have a tendency to forget, hey, there could be a lot of different people on here that are evaluating me as a potential person to buy something from, refer people to, or somebody that knows something that I need to know. And I want to convince them before I even have my chance to say anything, by the look that I have, the wardrobe I'm wearing, and my attitude, that I'm a person that they really want to be doing business with. So in my case, I like to think of myself as creative, strategic, empathetic, crafty, all positive words about myself that I hope come through as people start having conversations with me. But even before I start to speak, hopefully I'm dressed in a way that exudes professionalism and the fact that I'm ready to work with you and anybody else who might be on the call with us. How about your appearance? Here are some beautiful people that you can consider while you think about the fact that more than half of us base our perception of you on how you look. So if the wardrobe isn't right, if the look isn't right, if you don't look professional and ready to do business, already, before you say word one, you're already taking several notches down in our eyes. We're shallow as human beings. What we see, we immediately start to evaluate. And if it doesn't look like what we think it should look like from the standpoint of doing business with somebody, then we're going to have a hard time moving past that. Secondly, recruiters believe that 75% of what happens in our lives are based on the way a person dresses. It affects things like salary and promotions and the way other people view you within your company. So somebody down the hall might be dressing beautifully, professionally. Every call they show up on, when it's a group environment, they look like they're ready to go. And you've checked out a little bit. You've got that more casual, relaxed look about you. You're favoring more to t-shirts and polos and things like that. And the other person isn't. And all of a sudden you start seeing they're getting more promotions. They're getting the chance to meet with the better clients. Their opinion is being asked on things. Why? Because the world is perceiving them as more ready to do business than you. Don't let something like your wardrobe stand in the way. And as we're discussing today, you know we can see you. So if you are bringing that whole environment with you, now in my case, I'm using a virtual screen. But if you're bringing that background with you, you have to take a good look at that background. We're going to go into that in detail in a few minutes with Kerry. But that background becomes part of your brand image. And it's nonverbal. It's speaking for you when you're not even saying a word. So you need to be ready from the get-go, ready to meet. Also, that room also says something about you. So if it looks sloppy, how do you think that makes us feel in terms of whether or not we might or might not want to be transacting business with you or referring people to you? Now, of course, this photo is a really extreme example, but your room reflects who you are. And so you're better off with a virtual background like I have if you don't have a great area behind you, if you can't arrange it in a way that looks really professional the way Kerry's does, but you're bringing that with you. So until we get back to meeting face to face, remember your room is part of that image. Now, what about the elevator pitch? I'm going to touch on that real quickly here also. Elevator pitches are all about preparation. So the doors open on the 3rd floor when we get back to the real world or on a Zoom call. As soon as that camera turns on, you're now on there with somebody and the door is going to close. And what you say over the next 30 to 45 seconds is going to go a long way in determining whether or not that person wants to hear more about you and what you're speaking about, or whether they're looking left and they're looking right and they're trying to figure out how they're going to get out of this situation because they don't know what this person is speaking about. So the key is, do you know the goal of this particular pitch? And I will tell you right now, don't make the mistake of thinking if you have one good pitch, which I find most people don't have, but that one pitch does not fit all the audiences that you may address. For example, if you're in the real estate space, you're a real estate broker, agent, and you're going to a convention with other real estate brokers and agents, you would think your pitch is going to be completely different than if you were going to a convention with first-time home buyers. So you have to try and understand who that audience is that you're going to be addressing. What does your potential client need to know? Not what do you want to tell them? And why is your product or service important to them? We know why it's important to you. It's commission, it's sales, it's your company. But what's going to be empathetic about what you're saying? How are you going to draw them in and make them realize that you understand their pain, you understand their problem, you're empathetic, and you could help them? That's how you really get somebody moving towards you when you start to deliver your elevator pitch. And the way you break your elevator pitch down is by taking it to its lowest common denominator, which is a key question of, why do you even matter? Why does your business even exist? This is a spreadsheet that I've developed to help you fill in the key questions of how to really pull together a great elevator pitch. So, what do you do? How do you do it? How do you do it differently than your competitors? Why are you relevant in the marketplace today? How are you different in terms of what you are doing? If you haven't taken the time to think about these things, I urge you, I can send you a copy of this form, a blank one, and you should spend some time really thinking about what it is about your business that is different and compelling than the people who you compete with. And don't kid yourself, everybody out there has got a competitor, because one key competitor everybody has is the ability to say no, no matter what your product or service is. So fleshing out purpose and positioning is really important. And again, I find 80 to 90% of the people I come in contact with, they don't take the time to think about this when it comes to an elevator pitch. They just go out there and wing it. If that's been you up to now you should know better. Let's not have you winging it going forward. Every elevator pitch has a few different elements, and the most important that I think is your opening. How you open with two things. One, how do you look? Let's just take for granted that you're going to take my advice and Kerry's advice. You're going to look super professional, ready to do business. You're going to look like somebody that we're going to look at and say, wow, this person is really ready to go. So that's a given. And now, how am I going to open? My key tip here is to either find a question or a fact about what you do that will be compelling to your audience. For example, I normally will open my elevator pitch by saying 80% of the people I come in contact with struggle with their message and their elevator pitch. But don't worry, I can help you. I'm a message development expert. That's what I help people do. Create crystal clear messages. My name is Glenn. My company has always been creative. I'd love to help you with your message. Now you'll notice when I started doing that, I didn't start by saying what my name was. That's irrelevant. I didn't start by telling you what my company name was. That's irrelevant. What I started with was a reason for you to listen. I said 80% of the people struggle with their elevator pitch. And now if you're one of those 80%, you're listening. Or if you know somebody else that struggles with that, maybe you're listening for them. What problems do you solve? How can you help other people with the problems they have? How are you different? And by all means also, you must be enthusiastic about this. If you're bored with what you're doing, that resonates right through the screen. If you're not on, if you're not feeling it, take a deep breath. Take a deep breath before you do this and make sure you open strong, because if you don't, you're going to have a very difficult time pulling somebody back in from a poor opening. Lose the fillers. Get right to a key point that's going to get everybody's attention and make them realize you mean business. Use a statistic, a fact, or a question. That's my advice for you on openings. Next up, what's your unique selling proposition? What do you do that's better than your competitors? I touched on this earlier with features and benefits. Faster, better, free, key statistic, something you do that your competitors don't. All part of your elevator pitch. And finally, engagement. How are you getting people to lean in and say, I like what he's saying, I like how he's saying it, I want to hear more. I'm going to get in touch with him because I like the energy level, and I like the fact that he's addressing something that has to do with me. He's not selling me, he's telling me that he knows people struggle with something and he can help them fix it. That's engagement. All part of that elevator pitch. Now, I'm going to throw it back to Kerry. We're going to wrap it up, and then we'll take some questions.
Very good. Thank you, Glenn. Sorry, I had to mute myself. I apologize once again if you heard my 3, 6, and 9-year-old losing their collective minds in the background. I'd like to take a moment to talk. Glenn mentioned background. I'd like to dive a little bit into that. And I'd also like to talk about your energy for your delivery and why that is important. The background, as I mentioned, it sets the tone for who you are, what you do, and what you're about to talk to. And I realize I got lucky in this space, and I happen to love my background. Many of us don't. And for good reason, right? We're working with the challenges that this pandemic has thrust upon us. If you have a choice between sitting in a room that has a very dark background versus one that has a neutral background, always, and by neutral, I mean colors, not necessarily what you have back there. You may have personal effects back there. All of that is fine. That stigma is gone. As long as it's not distracting or inappropriate, it's fine. But if you have the choice between sitting in a room with, let's say, navy walls or a dark wood versus something with a lighter background, a more neutral background, a light gray, go with the lighter background. And the reason is not only does it help you pop when you're in a sea of other faces on a networking call, but it also looks more open. It looks more inviting. It doesn't look as caved in, as you will. You know, there's a very subtle thing that people do with their hands when they're talking. When you want to tamp something down, you go like this, right? Let's stop for a minute and talk about this. When you want to open and welcome, you are palms up. It's sort of the same idea. It's analogy I'm using for the background. If you have a dark cavernous background, it's sort of I'm not really wanting to be present here. I would prefer to sit in the shadows versus a light, bright background is that warm, open, and welcoming feeling. At least that's what you're doing on a subconscious level. Again, I realize we all are dealing with the challenges. Perhaps that's where a green screen comes into effect, similar to the one that Glenn is using. If you have questions about how to use a green screen, when is appropriate, how to make sure that it is pristine and you're not dealing with a lot of the challenges, Glenn has good lighting, which is one of the reasons why when he moves his head, it doesn't look like half of his head is chopped off, or when he moves his arm, he doesn't look like he's missing all of his fingers and he has a club hand. The lighting is what makes the difference there. If you have questions about how to implement, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. It's a little bit much for just a general conversation here, but if you have questions, ask. And if we can't answer, we'll talk offline. The other thing that I'd like to talk about is your delivery and the energy that you put into it. One of the things that a camera does, is it tamps down on all of the things that we want to explode off the screen, and it has a tendency to highlight the things we would prefer it did not. So you have a blemish on your skin, you might as well put a neon light around it and start flashing lights and saying, look here, look here. You are having a tired day and you're not delivering with as much energy as you normally would. There's a thought bubble on your camera that says, this girl's tired. Don't listen to her. So the camera eats energy for lunch is what it comes down to, which means when you're delivering, your nonverbals, your voice, your pitch, your projection, your pacing, all has to be almost over the top. In order for you to look like you have a normal amount of energy, you have to deliver with more than a normal amount of energy. And part of that is using body language. Now, one of the things that's tricky is that if you are not paying attention, if you happen to be looking down and answering an email on your phone, or your kids are losing their mind right outside your office door, there are distractions galore. And not only is it you that's distracted, it's the person on the other side of the lens that's distracted as well. They're dealing with the same challenges. So amplifying your nonverbals and your messaging is one great way to make sure that you continually have their interest. And if they're distracted for a second, there's going to be some sort of pattern interrupt that will bring them back to what you're saying. Nonverbals is a great way to bring that element front and center when you're delivering. So I like to say, this is distracting. The lean in is a great way to let your audience know what I'm about to tell you is super important. So listen up. You don't have to verbalize it, but using the body language, and that's just one tip to make sure that your energy is present and that people are paying attention is key. I think one of the things that people struggle with on camera, and this applies across the board, is people who are quite energetic in person. You turn on that camera and all of a sudden they freeze, and everything that made them unique and interesting and dynamic sort of filters away because we have stage fright to some degree. Overcome that, and you can fall back on what is the performative aspects of delivery. So once you get comfortable with feeling over the top, it doesn't matter what's going on. You can fall back on that performance, which means you know that body language, leaning in, using your hands, all of those things helps convey energy, even if you're not necessarily feeling it. So you're looking into the camera, you're smiling or you're frowning, you're using words to describe what it is that you're feeling or thinking so that nothing can be misconstrued. And you're using your body to help tell the story. Now, I like to describe it in this way, and then I'll wrap up. This is a simple way to highlight how body language is used. You know, if you open a website and it is just text, it's words and words and words and words and words, and there's probably a lot of great stuff there, but holy cow, you're not going to read it all because it looks boring as heck. And then you open up another website and it's the same content, but the paragraphs are separated and the key points are highlighted within the paragraphs in bold text. And there are visuals or pictures that go along with it that break up the text and highlight the certain elements and provide a visual accompaniment. That's the difference between you speaking and you speaking using nonverbals, facial expressions, body language. Your words are the text. Your body language, your energy, and your facial expressions, those are all the things that add the interesting elements. Those are the bullet points. Those are the visuals. Those are the things that separate your main points and your paragraphs. So your delivery, your content is important, but all that other stuff that goes along with it is perhaps even more so. And nowhere is that more prevalent than when you are speaking on video. And I'm going to bring it around to one of the things I first mentioned. The reason for that is that we lose so much context in this little square right here. You can't see anything that's going on outside of that square with me. And likewise, I with you. And there's a million distractions that are going on. So you need to overcome those distractions by energy, delivery, body language, and all of those other visual elements with your framing and your shot and your angle and all that other stuff that we spoke about in the beginning. All of those things brought together, make sure that you are able to deliver with confidence. You're able to deliver with authority, credibility, energy, and it will set you heads and shoulders above 98% of the people that you'll be on these sorts of calls with. With that said, I'll wrap it up and I'll hand it back to Glenn.
Super. So, again, we're really just fortunate. I mean, Mary, you're the only one who's really here with us on screen. Ronnie is. I know Yuan is out there. And just looking real quickly, April, I think, is out there. And Carolyn, potentially, I think we just lost Carolyn.
Oh, no.
No, there's Carolyn. Sorry. She's actually came on screen. There were two questions that I noticed. One, Kerry, that you can address right away, which is about glare on your glasses when you're using ring lights and lights that are in front of us. And I know Kerry's got a great explanation for how to get around this. So why don't you answer that one, Kerry?
Of course. So the thing that is tricky about, and listen, I have glasses too. They're over on the side right now. I try not to wear them if I don't absolutely have to, because although, again, it seems like it's just aesthetics, it is when you have the big ring light circles in your eyes or the glare from your computer, it inhibits people from looking into your eyes. And while they might absolutely recognize why they can't see your eyes, there's something that goes on up here that changes the way that they potentially think about you. Couple really basic things. Obviously, the anti-reflective lenses on your glasses if you don't have them. I also suggest dialing down the brightness of your monitor. That can help. And also, you can put a privacy screen on top of your monitor. It's not perfect, but it will help inhibit that glare as well. They are making computers right now that have a special non-reflective covering on the monitor itself, because they're aware that this has become an issue for many, many people. So if you are in the market for a new computer, look for that. Outside of what's going on in front of your monitor, it's the ring lights. And basically it comes down to this. It's geometry. So when I'm wearing my glasses, I will never have a ring light set directly in front of me because I know that it's going to reflect into my glasses. If you can change the angle of the light, you can pretty much avoid that. So if I'm going to be wearing my glasses, I set 2 ring lights up, right, outside of my regular situation. I put them on either side, slightly above eye level and tilted down. My face will get the light that it needs, but the angles of that light prevent it from hitting my glasses and directly reflecting back into the camera. Now that might change a little bit if I tend to be somebody who moves a lot when I'm talking, but generally speaking, if you can get the angles correct where there's not a direct reflection, you're going to be in a safe zone.
Great. And the other question really concerned the use of green screens like I have. And that really comes down to the particular computer that you have. Most of the newer computers have enough memory to be able to generate the green screen right off of the computer. But if they don't, then you need to invest in what is called a green screen. And I don't know if I can actually show you. Basically, behind me now, I've got from floor to ceiling, basically, and about 8 feet wide, a big piece of lawn green fabric that sits behind me. And that's what the computer reads as green screen. That's what the television networks do. If you've ever seen them mess up when the person is doing the weather report and whatnot, they actually are standing in front of a green screen, and all of the statistics about the temperature and all that are just like the way On Point On Air is put up on the screen behind me. So it's really difficult to answer that for anyone specifically without knowing what kind of equipment you're using. But if you've got a newer computer, you should have the ability to generate a green screen, and it's right there in Zoom. If you look at your Zoom and you go to where it says stop video, and you can choose a virtual background, you can use one of the programs like Canva to actually create different backgrounds like the one I have created here that you can use. You can use photos. I see Carolyn looks like maybe she's got a great shot of Stony Brook maybe in the background there. I'm not really sure. I think so. But, there's a million choices if you do that. I know, Jacqueline, you were the one specifically asking about that. Really depends on your piece of equipment. Don't know if anybody else has any. Yeah, sure. If anybody else has questions, listen, we're a small group. You don't necessarily at this point have to put them into the chat. But if anybody else has questions, you can raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll get ready to wrap it up and let everybody get on to their day.